Hello again, everyone. Richard here at Grand Wazoo with another video and another installment in the series Frank Zappa, One Album at a Time. And seeing how I recently went over the albums Waka Jawaka and the Grand Wazoo, I thought I would jump out of order and head to actually official release number 76 because it's very much connected to the Waka Jawaka and Grand Wazoo releases. And that is this one, Frank Zappa, Imaginary Diseases. This is a CD-only release that first was issued originally in January of 2006, and then there was a reissue in March of 2017. There is an unauthorized version on vinyl, which I used to have in my want list in Discogs, but because Discogs forbids the sale of unauthorized or unofficial releases, I removed it from my want list because what's the point? I'm not going to be able, via that mechanism, find a vinyl pressing, of this. I'm just going to have to happen across it out in the wild someplace, or somebody letting me know that they know where one is. So, would I get? Yeah, I would. I would buy the vinyl pressing, simply because I'm that kind of completist. But there is some interesting background before I start talking about the individual tracks about this. But this did come with a booklet, which I've lost. I am so annoyed, by that I lost the booklet. Just really, I'm starting to think that I probably threw it away unintentionally. But here's the, the CD. So the background is these are all live recordings, and a lot of interesting things about these recordings. First of all, it was a tour from October through December of 1972. And this was with the Grand Wazoo band, which was a 10-piece band. And then there was the Grand Wazoo band that Frank also toured, which was the 20-piece band. Now, this was never officially called, although you see, it says in here, Oh, the Grand Wazoo. At the time of the touring, it was not called the Grand Wazoo Tour or the Grand Wazoo Band. It was, and as you can see, this is listed as Frank Zappa. But on the tour, it was headlined as Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. So that's, how they toured. Who came up with the term Grand Wazoo to describe that band? Zappa himself did use it to refer to that particular group. Whether somebody else had coined the phrase first and then he picked it up from there, that's a little more difficult to say. There is some conflicting evidence as to whether Frank even wanted to release these tapes. He taped every show, and it's one of the few tours that he did record, every show. Now, there's an interview link, which I will have in the Down Under, that this interview link suggests, and this is an interview from 1989, it suggests that he did not want to release it, that he just wanted to keep the recordings sort of as a personal souvenir, of that particular tour. So that's what he was saying in this interview in December of 1989. There's a different interview, however, from October 1974. So this would have been shortly after this tour. That one suggests that he did consider releasing the recordings. But then he dropped the project because at that time there was a vinyl shortage. And it probably would have been a 2 LP set. And also there was a cardstock shortage. So he was saying that he wouldn't even have been able to do a gatefold. So kind of, conflicting. We've got him saying one thing, in 1974 and then saying something different in 1989. That's not uncommon with a lot of people. We have our mind made up about what we want to do in the current moment and not ever remembering that we may have had a different thought or, a different desire years before. Regardless, Joe Travers from, the Vault and sound engineer, I think he's a sound engineer, Spence Chrislew, worked on the tapes that they initially found through the help of Gail Zappa, and they were putting together some CD releases from, this tour, which I should have looked this up and I did not, but I don't think it was a very big tour. I think they might have hit 12 cities in the US and Canada. But anyway, while Travers was working on this, he then discovered a group of tapes that were already edited and, and mastered. So, which helped him out because as he was going through a lot of the tapes, he noticed there were a lot of gaps in the recordings, etc., that didn't quite make sense to him. But then he found, these tapes that apparently Zappa did put a lot of work into packaging them for potential commercial release. So Travers used these tapes to eventually have 2 releases. So the first one is this one, which he released, and which was released, I should say, in 2006. The second one became the release known as Little Dots, and that was released in 2016. So Little Dots is also part of the Grand Wazoo tour, and in fact, there are several songs on here that are heavily edited and shortened that appear in their entirety on Little Dots. I do not have Little Dots, unfortunately. It's going to have to be on one of my my want lists. So the players, I have to look these up here. I want to mention all the players that were in the Grand Wazoo band, and I'm using the information here in the big note. Fabulous Frank Zappa resource. Okay, so the band was Gary Barone on trumpet, Earl Dumler on oboe, saxophone, and sarrusophone, which I'll talk about later. Tony Duran on slide guitar, Glenn Ferris on trombone, Bruce Fowler on trombone, Jim Gordon on drums. This is one of the reasons why I love this release, is Jim Gordon's drumming. Tom Malone on trumpet, trombone, tuba, and saxophone. Malcolm McNabb on trumpet. Dave Parlato on bass, and then Frank on guitar. So those are the folks, in the band. It was mostly instrumental shows. There were some songs included in the show that, had lyrics. They included, typically as part of the tour, they would play Cosmic Debris, they'd play Montana, they'd play Play Rollo, and then also the song I'm Not Satisfied. However, in this release, we're talking completely instrumental, except for the opener, which just has vocalizations from the crowd. So Rollo is on this, but it's a completely instrumental version. So the tour also had one improvised piece per show. Now, improvised pieces are not that common with Frank. I mean, much of his material is orchestrated, and everybody's got their specific parts with, during live performances, some latitude allowed for, a little expression outside of the written music or the part that the musician was to play. But in this tour, at least one song per show, it was usually, from what I've read, it was usually limited to just one song per show, was an improvisation. And some of these jams were pretty incredible. And on here, this has 4 of the improvisations. And, we're talking 7 songs, so 4 of them are improvs. So starting off, the opening track is called Audience. Sounds like audience, but it's audience, as in ODDIENTS. Frank being a little clever with the words. And it's a very short piece, but it includes audience participation. So it is the one piece that has vocalizations with it. I mean, in some of the other songs, Frank talks when he introduces the piece, or he says something, at the end, but it's not part of the piece. In the case of audience, then the audience participation is part of it. Then we go into the song Rollo, which is the instrumental part. This song is quite long in its original bit, and they played the entire song, including the voice parts, but this has been edited down to, let me see what the timing is on it. It was edited down to 3 minutes, 21 seconds, and just the instrumental part. The next song is Been to Kansas City, which was recorded in Kansas City, and it's an improvisational blues tune. So it is some really incredible stuff here. It's a little more than 10 minutes. It does have 2 minutes of material that has been edited out. There's Zappa does a guitar solo, but there were actually 2 solos in the song. So the second one is edited out. It starts with a trumpet solo by Gary Barone. And right away from this song, you can hear Jim Gordon's drumming is so strong and precise. He is just, and maybe it's not the right term to use, but the word that kept coming to mind when I'm listening to this recording in regards to Jim Gordon's drumming is maniacal. And it is just really, really incredible. Now, I'll have a link in the Down Under, because I did a video in terms of the genealogy of music that is devoted to Jim Gordon and all the people that Gordon played with. So I'll have a link to that, so check it out for sure and learn a great deal more about Jim Gordon. The first guitar solo in here, however, is not Frank Zappa. It is Tony Duran on slide guitar. And I tell you what, he puts the stink on that solo. It is really, really a sweet solo. Then we've got Glenn Ferris doing a trombone solo. And then Frank has, his solo, and you can hear it's distinctly, Frank toward the end of the song. Great, great piece. The next one is Farther Oblivion. All right, so this is not an improvised piece. It's a jazz fusion piece for the most part. The core of it is kind of jazz fusion. It's just got this mind-blowing tuba solo. Yeah, Tom Malone does this tuba solo. That's just really, really incredible. And then we have this a tango in the middle of the song, which Frank explains to the audience before the song starts. After the tango part, we get a trombone solo from Bruce Fowler, which is just as soaring and amazing as that tuba solo was. We have Jim Gordon doing a drum solo also. And there are parts in that solo where it really sounds like there's two people playing. That, like how some bands, when they tour, they'll have two drummers. But it's just all Jim Gordon. He is just so freaking amazing. And this is one of the parts where, his talent is showing through. Although as I said earlier, his drumming in Bend to Kansas City is just incredible. And the drumming that he does in some of the other songs later is just equally as incredible. So that's Farther Oblivion. Then we get into the next one, which is DC Boogie. And that's an improvisational piece. This is an epic piece. The original, this was played in Washington, D.C., the original song, this improvisational jam, was 32 minutes. And we're getting 13 minutes and 26 seconds. And it is already 13 minutes into the song when it starts. So, among that 13 minutes that is edited out, in the start, are a bunch of solos by horns and woodwinds, and etc. And it's all in 7/4 time. The slide guitar solo for the boogie. All right, so in the middle of the song, again, Gordon's drumming is just incredibly precise and strong. Start off very much, like a blues number, and then in the middle of the song, Frank polls the audience as to should they do a boogie, should they do a, pet food commercial jingle, something like that, and so they go with the boogie for the sort of second half of the song, and that kicks off with Tony Duran on the slide guitar. Again, he's just putting a stink on it. But then Frank has a guitar solo at the end that is just as searing and knife sharp. Then we go into the song Imaginary Diseases, the titular song. And this is, again, this is probably one of the reasons I probably listened to this recording. It's not necessarily one of my top favorites, but I probably listen to this the most. And the fact that it's mostly instrumental probably has a lot to do with that. But also a lot of these improvisational jams are just really, really, really amazing. So with Imaginary Diseases, there's some other things that kind of come up in here. And one of them is Earl Drumler. I mentioned this at the start of the video. He is playing this E-flat contrabass sarrusophone. Now, interestingly, Zappa used the sarrusophone on songs on Waka Jawaka and the Grand Wazoo. All right, but it sort of gets special mention in the big note for this recording. And I was like, what the hell is a sarrusophone? So I ended up looking it up, and you can check it out. It's an easy thing to Google, but it began as a double reeded instrument, and then later modifications made it a single reed instrument. And it has the fingering that's nearly identical to a saxophone. Now, you know how a bassoon, you've got the mouthpiece, and then the neck goes up, and then it goes into the bassoon, and the bassoon is basically just this one big post. That's why it's often called the bedpost by both the players and others, in whatever band. This sarrusophone is all brass, for one thing. And so from the mouthpiece, it goes up, and then it snakes down, and then it comes back up, and then it goes down, and it's getting gradually wider and wider, and then it goes up and then there's the bell, which is like way, way up high. So, if you're blowing in the mouthpiece here, the bell of the horn is going to be above your head. So that's kind of really interesting. And I think you can kind of hear it. It does have a sort of a combined tone of a saxophone and a bassoon in a way, I guess you could describe it. And I'll certainly be listening for it more closely at Waka Jawaka and the Grand Wazoo. So again, Imaginary Diseases, wonderful, wonderful song. Then we've got the closer, which is called Montreal, because it was in Montreal. And this is actually an extension of the song Audience, okay? So this is the improvisational part of Audience. Well, the whole thing was an improv. So I'm not sure if it was before or after what happened with Audience. But Frank's got a really, really sweet solo in this as well. And again, Joe Gordon's drumming just really, really blows me away. Plus, a couple of these songs are danceable, but man, Montreal really makes me want to, stand up and boogie to it. And it's funny because even Frank made the joke about how, he made music that people couldn't dance to. And that was part of the reason, part of the difficulty in reaching a larger audience is because he didn't get a lot of radio play because, you can't dance to it. And in fact, he would have these dance contests during shows, which I think were primarily motivated to mock people and to, challenging them to dance to his music. And of course, the band would always play something so complex that nobody could dance to it. And that was the whole point. Frank wanted people to just cut loose, and very few people could. Anyway, that is an aside. That is a diversion. But nonetheless, the closer, Montreal, again, is kind of a blues boogie, and it's definitely danceable. Really, really good. It's a very sweet jam. So those are the songs for Imaginary Diseases. And it's official release number, what did I say? Number 76. But we'll go back, to follow the discography back to the original order, following up with what comes after the Grand Wazoo. Hope you enjoyed this. Leave a comment. Check out I have some other links, down in the Down Under. I'll have a link to that interview I mentioned with Frank Zappa. It's a very, very long interview. He talks about everything from his observations in the then Soviet Union and in Czechoslovakia. He talks a little bit about, they briefly talk about this and, some other recordings. It's all transcribed. It's not an audio interview. It's all been transcribed. But it's a very, very long interview. I'll have a link to that. I'll have a link to the Grand Wazoo and Waka Jawaka videos, plus my standard link to the Frank Zappa playlist, and I'll have a link to the Jim Gordon genealogy of music. So they'll all be down there in the Down Under. So thank you so much for tuning in, and don't forget to pray for the people inside your head, for they won't be there when you're dead.